I wore my Planned Parenthood pink. But I could have worn purple for SEIU. Also the color of Minnesota's Prince, right? It is so wonderful to be here with all of you. They say that the arc of the moral universe is long. Well, you are the welders that are shortening it every day. So thank you for that. So you probably saw that I announced my candidacy for presidency in the middle of a blizzard, right? Like a foot of snow coming on my head. And after I did that, the president took me on climate change in one of his tweets, and he actually called me Snow Woman. And you know what I said to him? I wrote back, I'd like to see how your hair would fare in a blizzard. Mr. Umbrella, man. So I chose that place to announce my candidacy on that Mississippi River because I want to make the point that it is time for us to cross the river of our divides, to take something that you take care of every day, a sturdy bridge of our democracy, to a higher plane in our politics. And we have someone in the White House right now that's trying to fracture our sense of community every single day. He somehow thinks that organized hate is more powerful than unorganized love. Well, maybe he's right, but how do we respond to that? We organize, right? We organize, and that is how we win. So here is my background. It's actually kind of an organizing background. So my grandpa, as was mentioned, worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines up in Ely, Minnesota, the iron ore mines, his whole life. He never got to graduate from high school. He helped raise his younger brothers and sisters. He married my grandma. They had 2 boys. One was my dad, and my grandpa saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to a 2-year community college. From there, my dad got his journalism degree at the University of Minnesota and went on to get to go all over the world because of that degree. My mom grew up in Milwaukee, the site of our convention in 2020. And she got a teacher's degree, and she moved to Minnesota. Why? Because they had strong teachers' unions. And she ended up teaching 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. And I still have people come up to me and tell me that she was her favorite teacher. So I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, as the daughter of a teacher and a newspaperman, as the first woman elected to the United States Senate from the state of Minnesota, and as a candidate for President of the United States. That is what shared dreams in this country are all about, no matter where you come from, no matter who you know, no matter what you look like, and no matter who you love, you can get ahead in this country. And that's why I'm running for president. So what I have seen in this White House, to me, is a tear down every day of our democracy. And I know one of the things that unites all of you is this work to make sure that we have a strong democracy. When you look at what's been going on, this is what I think we need to do. Number 1, restore the Voting Rights Act, right? And make sure people have the bill. Number 2, pass my bill to register every eligible voter when they turn 18, okay? That would fix all of this stuff. Number 3, stand up for civil liberties, right? We've got a president in the White House that literally tweets whatever he wants every single day, but doesn't respect the amendment that allows him to do it. We don't just tolerate the First Amendment, we embrace it. Stand up for an independent judiciary and stop these judges that are trying to take us back to 1972 when women didn't have a right to choose what to do with their bodies. That means funding Planned Parenthood, and that means standing up against someone. I mean, this guy thinks a doctor shouldn't be making your decisions and working with you. He thinks he should. We stand up against that. We also stand up against racial inequality and for civil liberties in this country. And that means not just the First Step Act, but the Second Step Act. And finally, immigration reform. I am so tired of hearing him talk about immigration the way he does, because to me, immigrants don't diminish America, They are America. So one of the things that we have seen this president do is he tries to talk the game, right? But instead, what do we see is more and more dark money coming into our politics. And I'm someone that thoroughly believes we need to judge people on their merit. We need to allow people to run no matter they're from. Actually, in my life, when I first ran for Senate, no one could pronounce my name, and I ended up giving up calling people all over the country because no one would call me back. And I finally ended up just calling everyone I knew in my life, and I raised what is still an all-time Senate record. I raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends. I did that. And as my husband has pointed out, it is not an expanding base. So if we want a real democracy, we need to pass aggressive campaign finance reform and get the dark money out of these politics. All right. And guess what? We can do two things at once. We can maintain our democracy and have an optimistic economic agenda for this country. That means supporting unions and raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, right? That means making sure that we take on and get to universal health care and take on those big pharma companies to bring down the costs of prescription drugs. I want you to remember that we can do this. I'm someone that has gotten everywhere I got when I was running against someone who actually had a lot more money than me and a lot more connections than me. And I did it because I've got grit. And I know you have that too. You look at what you have done since that president got sworn into office. The next day, millions of people marched all over this world, right? We marched peacefully and we marched. The next day, 6,000 women signed up for office, and now we're up to 30,000. On day 10, after that mean-spirited Muslim ban, that horrible refugee order got issued by the White House, what happened? People spontaneously showed up at the airports all around the country and protested. Who does that on a Saturday night? You did it, and they did it. You did it. On day 100, my favorite march, the March for Science, my favorite sign. What do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. Okay, we march for science, and we march to do something about climate change, and as your president, I'll get us back into that international climate change agreement on day one. You go through the summer when we stood up against that mean-spirited repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Every single Democrat stood together in the United States Senate and said, no, you're not going to kick off little toddlers with Down syndrome off of their parents' insurance for a pre-existing condition. We took them on and we won. You go through the fall in that incredible, incredible victory against racism and for decency and for dignity. Doug Jones won that race in the state of Alabama. That happened. Or my favorite legislative races that fall in Virginia and New Jersey, where a woman actually won, and she beat a guy who at the day of the Women's March had said, I hope they'll be home in time to make dinner. He got beaten by a woman. Then you go forward into the rest of the year where you saw those students march in unity, those Parkland students joined by kids all across the country that said, no, we're not going to take this anymore. The moms tried after Sandy Hook. Law enforcement tried. Everyone's tried. And guess what, guys? After those kids march, they didn't just march, they voted. And we get bested by a bunch of 17-year-olds to get common sense gun legislation in place. That's the right thing to do. That's what's happened in this country. And then you go to 2018, where all of you stood and we worked together. I was leading our ticket in Minnesota in a state Donald Trump almost won. Well, you know what we did? I went to every single county. I went to every single congressional district. I led that ticket of 2 Senate seats, a governor's seat, and guess what? I won for the 3rd time in a row, from rural to urban, every single congressional district, including Michelle Bachmann's. Then you look at what we did. We won the governor's race together in the state of Kansas and beat Chris Kobach. We did that. We won in Wisconsin and beat Scott Walker, that anti-union activist. We did that. So you look at this march, you look at the arc of the moral universe where we are headed. As long as we stay together and we organize and we beat out that organized hate with organized people, we will win in 2020 together. Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Come on and join us, Senator. Thank you for that. Ooh, you talked about those wins, and there's no group that knows better that when we fight, we win. When we organize, we win. Yes, yes. So you're about to hear from some of the organizers in the crowd, and I just want to let you know, we've got a few question askers here, and just in case you get a little bit too excited on the time, Anna Maria might give you a little tap on your shoulder. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. So our first question for Senator Klobuchar is coming from Douglas Sloan. A lifelong Washingtonian, Douglas currently serves as the first vice president of the D.C. NAACP chapter. Douglas is deeply politically and civically engaged here in the district, having served in the D.C. Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, on the Judiciary Committee of the D.C. City Council, and as a liaison between the council and local business associations, the ANCs, and the local school boards. Douglas currently works in political communications and strategy with the National Capital Strategy Group. Douglas, it's you.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Thanks for coming, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone out here for showing up. Give yourselves a hand. Fantastic. Love to see all this energy. So, every federal election cycle, 700,000 residents of the District of Columbia are effectively disenfranchised because we do not have voting senators and congressmen. And these are 700,000 residents, a majority of which are people of color. Congress continually subverts the will of the people in the District of Columbia, often through gun control or a woman's right to choose. This is un-American. My question to you is, will you support the existing legislation that was introduced by our delegate, non-voting delegate I might add, Eleanor Holmes Norton, H.R. 51 for statehood, and what will you do to ensure that statehood and self-determination for the citizens of the District of Columbia happens during your tenure if you are elected president?
Thank you. Well, I am proud to support statehood for Washington, D.C. I don't think you should have a big group of people that don't have anyone to represent them in Congress, and it's that simple. It means that you have many, many people that actually don't have a say over these important federal policies that influence their lives every day. So I think the most important thing to getting it done, because as you know, President Obama would have gotten it done, but I think the most important thing in getting it done, as you've already done it for us by taking back the House of Representatives, right? So guess what else we have to do? Take back the United States Senate. That's exactly right. And so if we can have a coalition, and I view this, one of the things that I've always seen, I come from the state of Paul Wellstone, right? Who saw politics as improving people's lives, who was a mentor to me, a friend to me, always out there in that green bus advocating for people. And he'd say he went to Washington for the people that didn't have representation, like the kids that couldn't write the checks in their high chairs. And I think that's exactly what's going on right here. So what we need to do is to make it a major priority, and it's about D.C. It's also about people who aren't represented, right, like getting Puerto Rico their money for that horrible damage that they had, the storm. It is also about voting rights, and look at what's been going on since the Supreme Court stepped in and took back a big chunk of that Voting Rights Act. You see what's happened in so many of these states. One great example of that, North Carolina, where the circuit court said they actually had discriminated with, and this is an exact quote, surgical precision, right? That's what's happening in our country to African Americans. That's what's happening to Latinos, to so many people that have a right to have a say at the table. Because what they always say in Washington is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So that is why D.C. should have statehood. That is why we have to bring back the Voting Rights Act. That's why we have to make sure that people in Puerto Rico get the help that they need. And that's right, why we need a new president in the White House.
Right. All right.
So, if you become president, I guess this is a test of how much of a priority that would be. Like, how early in your presidency would you bring up the issue of DC statehood, for example?
Well, I think you've got to do it right away in the first 100 days. But I also think what I have said is on day one, there's some stuff you can do without even passing it, right? So on day one, I'd sign us back into that climate change agreement. I can just do that, right? In the first 100 days, we have to put comprehensive immigration reform on the table. We've got to get it done. We have to get it introduced. And the bill, we have a great model from 2013 of a bill that had broad support of everything from the AFL-CIO to the migrant workers groups to the farm groups. And we have to bring back a strong immigration bill and get that done. We have to take on big pharma. You just can't wait. You got to get it done now. People are literally dying from rationing their insulin. We have to move to universal health care and get a public option introduced. These are all things I've always believed. When I started my first job in politics as county attorney, I would do a 100-day plan and a year-end plan. And I got a letter from kind of a persnickety judge, and he said, you better start viewing your time as more of a marathon than a sprint. Well, I think you can have your marathons, but you also have to have your sprints. And we have to set a different tone in Washington right now, and that is what we see with the work you did on H.R. 1. That is this is the people's city.
All right. All right, thank you so much. And just like you said, we cannot wait, right? These issues are so urgent. We've got another person in the audience that's got an equally urgent question to ask. Okay. Our next question is going to be from David Tucker. David, are you there? Yes. All right. Now, David is also from right here in the DMV. David Tucker started working as a skycap at Reagan National Airport in 1962. He was 2 years old at the time. He's a father of 7 and was earning just $3.77 an hour plus unreliable tips and had to pay out of pocket for his family's medical expenses. Now, after more than 50 years, David is finally receiving his first ever living wage.
Excellent.
Yes, and all that is thanks to a successful campaign led by 32BJ, SEIU, and his co-workers. Yes. Now, we're happy to say David's retiring soon, but he's here to continue the fight for every generation to come. David, the floor is yours.
Senator, I have been paying the price for corporate greed since airlines started contracting out more jobs about 40 years ago. I did not get a raise for 50 years so that these companies could make more money for themselves. Americans vote for politicians who promise to fight this corporate greed, but the very richest keep getting richer, and they keep getting more power to attack our jobs, our pay, and our communities. When a handful of voices at the top have more sway with our elected leaders than the rest of us everyday people, our democracy is broken. What will you do to stop these powerful abusers from attacking American workers and American jobs, all while undermining our democracy?
Thank you. That was great. And thank you so much. And I am so sad you worked for so hard for so long without getting a raise. So my first answer is to pass the $15 minimum wage. Nationally, literally, it has been nearly a decade, and we have not had an increase to the federal minimum wage. That is an outrage. The second thing we need to do is make sure we address income inequality and racial inequality, right? And that means everything from housing policy, which has gotten way too expensive for a lot of people, to child care policy, including early childhood, to making sure that we are giving people the benefits that they deserve. And especially in this economy the way it is now, we've got to make it easier for people to bring their benefits with them wherever they go. And I find the Republican tax bill, people say to me, well, how are you going to pay for this, right? Well, look at what they did with that Republican tax bill, right? They brought that corporate tax rate down to 21%. and every single point it moved was $100 billion that should be going to you, that should be going to our pensions, that should be going to infrastructure, which would help to upgrade so people can get to work, and transit systems and everything that they need. But that's what they did. And there's one other thing I want to bring up that I think is really important that doesn't always get talked about when you look at power and where the money is. And that is the way we've seen more and more consolidation of big companies in this country. We are literally entering, or are in, I would say, another gilded age, right? When you look for those online travel sites because you're trying to get a deal, if you ever done that, right? Expedia, all that. Do you know that nearly 80% of them are really just two companies, okay? That's true. Our rail right now is down to Class 1, 4 railroad companies carrying 90% of the traffic. That's as many as there are on the monopoly board, all right? We have gotten, I was just out in Iowa, a point where 78% of the farmer seeds are from just two companies. So that's why when you look at unfairness and power and why this is going on, you look through history when the workers in Chicago stood up and took on the monopoly, when the Granger movement in the Midwest did that. Yes, it's about organizing and making sure we've got a strong NLRB and the rules in place. Yes, it's about passing federal policy that allows for better benefits for our workers. But it is also about taking on these monopolies with antitrust and making sure that we do not allow monopoly power to squelch entrepreneurs, squelch new ideas, and squelch the workers of this country. That's... Thanks.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how that monopoly and that concentration of corporate power is actually showing up in our democracy? Yeah. And how you would enact and pass, you're famous for being able to work across the aisle. What would you do to work with Republicans to pass campaign finance reform and make sure that these monopolies are not also dominating our democracy?
Okay, so there are people that are starting to talk, mostly it's on our side, but there are people, few Republicans that are starting to talk about monopolies, especially in the tech industry. So you've got to find those people. And the two bills that I've put out there are, one, a bill that puts a fee on the mega mergers, those really big mergers, and says that that money then finds them, puts a tax on them basically, and then says that money's got to go to make a stronger Federal Trade Commission. That's the ones that looks at all these deals and can look back at them. And then also stronger Justice Department. So that's one. The second is just changing the standards that are in the law right now. So that if you have one of these big mergers, they, not the government, they have to show that it doesn't reduce competition, right? Mm-hmm. And they have to show that it's what's happening and how it's going to affect people. And right now we've got a situation where our laws are not as sophisticated as these titans that are making these deals. Yeah. And we need to be able to look back at those. And you know, you look at some of the things through history that worked. We brought long distance fees down with the breakup of AT&T. We were able to do better in a number of areas when we were strictly enforcing those antitrust laws. And now you've got situations. I was with our CWA workers yesterday in Minnesota, where I am there we go. And I am opposed to this deal, but where Sprint and T-Mobile, right? If they merge, then we're down to only 3 long-distance companies. Right. This is going on across the industry, so we actually have to take legislative action, and you want a president. By the way, Teddy Roosevelt, trust buster, right? So you want some modern-day trust busting going on with these companies and what's happening to help our workers.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Senator, we have one more question for you. I'm so proud to introduce this person, Valencia Gunder. She's been called the modern-day Fannie Lou Hamer in her community. She's a criminal justice program manager at the New Florida Majority Vision and founder of the Smile Trust, Inc. Valencia has been a faithful advocate fighting alongside the residents of her community to ensure they receive fair and just treatment. Valencia, who's a returning citizen, was a leader on passing Amendment 4 in Florida, which restored the right to vote for 1.5 million Floridians. Valencia, the mic is all yours.
Thanks for your work, Valencia.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hello.
So I want to start by saying America's the first world country that creates second-class citizens that have to deal with third world situations. I am Valencia Gunder from Miami, Florida, beautiful Sunshine State. And in 2010, I was extradited across the state of Florida for writing a check for $1,700 for my college tuition. While I was being extradited and booked in and out of these different facilities, I finally got my day in court. And at that time, I was charged with a felony for passing a worthless check. I didn't understand what it meant to be a felon, so I asked my lawyer, and my lawyer then explained to me the different rights that I would lose, and the one that stuck out to me the most was voting. And we all know that taking people's voting rights is racist, and it's deeply involved with the Jim Crow laws. So I was deeply hurt because before that date, I was actually very involved with voting, being a part of different campaigns, and I really enjoyed participating in democracy, so it crushed me that I would no longer be able to. So in 2015, I met a wonderful organizer by the name of Desmond Meade. Yeah, shout out to Desmond. And he explained to me all of this good work that was happening to organize around getting the rights back for voting for returning citizens across the state of Florida. And since that day, I had did everything in my power to make sure that Amendment 4 passed. And in 2018, we won.
Yes.
1.5 million Floridians actually got a true second chance. I just registered to vote last week, y'all. However, roughly 1 in 40 adults in the U.S. cannot vote due to felony convictions. For African Americans, that number is 1 in 13. As president, what will you do to restore the rights of formerly incarcerated people? And how will you ensure everyone is able to cast a ballot regardless of a past felony conviction?
Well, it sounds like we should put you in charge to begin with. But I think we need to pass nationwide, right? The ability for people to be able to vote when they get out of prison. It's a crazy situation that you would have people who are actually in the community, working in the community, in with their families, paying their taxes, right? That they can't vote. I'm glad that in my state, we're actually trying to follow your lead in Florida, and with our new governor, he has now put forward the effort to make sure that people can vote when they get out of prison. I actually visited someone in prison for years and years and years through a community program. She had a major conviction. And I got to see a lot of the families there, and I got to see their kids trying to visit. This was at the women's prison. And I also got to see their hope when they were going to get out, because most people get out, right? Except for the most heinous criminals. And so that hope should come, with that hope, should come the ability to be part of America. And that means you should be able to vote. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as I mentioned before, we've got to just make it easier to allow people to vote. That means everything from the bill I mentioned I have to allow kids to vote, to automatically register when they turn 18, to same-day registration, which we have in our state, and a bunch of states that have that have some of the highest voter turnout in the country, to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act so we can't allow these individual states to discriminate. And I actually, one of the things that really bugs me is things like that Klobuchar Commission and what they were saying that there's all this voters fraud. We have seen study after study that shows that's just not true, right? They are doing this to try to scare people from voting. I know this personally because in my job before I was senator, we had a Republican Secretary of State. And she was sending us all these cases where she said there was fraud in voting. And I had to make sure that we followed up on every single case to show that that wasn't true. And almost 80% of them was fathers and sons with the same names, okay? They weren't committing fraud, they just had the same name. And I saw that time and time again when I forced that voting law, that there was just a minimum of that kind of stuff where people violated the laws. And so what is violating the law is if we don't allow people to vote in this country. So I thank you for your work, and we must allow every person eligible to vote in this country, or we don't have a true democracy. And if you want to get the things done that we're talking about today with climate change and with minimum wage increase and the work that needs to be done on immigration reform, we can't get it done if we've got big, dark money that is stopping us from getting it done by making it so people can't vote. So I think every time we take over a state legislature governor's race, that we've got to change those voting laws and make it easier for people to vote, and then we should do what we can federally.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the people who asked these amazing questions. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, I do? Okay, I will. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank you for working across your group lines, right? We can get kind of divided into groups, even for progressives, and people want to see change. And you did that in 2018, and you're doing it now. And the other thing, coming from a state that has both a big metro area and a big rural area, and having spent time this weekend with those floods in Iowa, and one thing I didn't get to talk enough about was climate change and how important that is to what we need to do. And so I think I'll just spend my last few minutes here talking about that. Having a voice from the Midwest, I think, is important on this. You want voices from all over the country because, yes, we've got the rising sea levels. I was in Tampa Bay meeting with them on climate change. And yes, we've got a lot of our coastal issues, but we also have to make the case, if we want to pass the laws we need to change this, that we have problems in every single state in the country. And that includes the flooding we're seeing right now in the Midwest, right? I was at a home of someone, it was flooded actually, we're looking at this one, a woman named Fran, and her house had been there since 1899. They still had horsehair in the plaster, she said. But yet her house, which is 2.5 miles from the river, 2.5 miles from the river in the state of Iowa, is probably gone forever. And she started to cry when she talked about that, about her kitchen and how that's where she would sit with her 4-year-old kids every single day. We have to talk about the tornadoes and what we're seeing, the wildfires, and probably the most moving thing was that video in Northern California while Paradise, literally the name of the town, was burning, and that dad was driving with his little girl and with the fires lapping over their car, and he's singing to her to calm her down. That isn't happening 100 years from now, that's happening right now. And so that's why I thank you for everything you're doing for the people of this country. But climate change is no longer something that's just some esoteric scientific fact. Is it happening or not? It's something we have to do something about right now.
Yes.
So thank you, everybody.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Let's give it up one more time for the senator.